124. The failure of piecemeal religion. The world of piecemeal religion is a nightmare realm in which the most unwelcome of all things is reality. Men reject the fact of consequences. They refuse to believe that certain things follow inevitably when men commit themselves to certain courses of action. They insist on believing that the road to Babylon will not take them to Babylon, but to Eden. Consider, for example, Walter Kaufmann's Without Guilt and Justice. Kaufmann rightly recognizes that guilt and justice, like good and evil, truth and error, and right and wrong, are theological doctrines. They presuppose the existence of the God of Scripture. Having abandoned that God, he holds that we must abandon the doctrines of guilt and justice in favor of autonomy. He finds the paradigm for autonomy in the tempter's plan as presented in Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 to 5. He rejects also the ideas of a good and bad conscience. On the other hand, he illogically believes that morality, integrity, and honesty are possible without God and in terms of autonomy. He believes that standards of honesty have been raised in the 20th century, apparently because of philosophers and scientists like himself. He adds, in radical contradiction to all that he affirms, that autonomy is not enough. The Marquis de Sade was more consistent. His premises were the same as Kaufmann's, but his conclusions were in conformity with his premises. Perhaps we should not expect too much from Kaufmann, since he's a man who, in 1942, found Hegel to be honeymoon reading. On the other hand, since every man is created in God's image, we have the right to require more of them than this. In any case, ideas do have consequences, and they are inescapable. Our Lord makes this clear in Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 to 27. Therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine, and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man, which built his house upon a rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock. And every one that heareth these sayings of mine, and doeth them not, shall be likened unto a foolish man, which built his house upon the sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. First of all, while a man's faith has immediate consequences, those consequences are not necessarily apparent at once. Thus, a man who builds without a foundation has at once endangered his life's structure, but that collapse will become apparent only with a storm. People who try to establish their lives and their children's lives on a character without faith, on morality without roots, have thereby destroyed their future. The fact that the damage may only become apparent years later does not nullify the causal relationship. Men who take the first step into a false faith are at the same time moving into blindness. They refuse to see the consequences of their religious commitment. Arend J. Ten Pass, in The Lordship of Christ, 1976, has shown the results of false theology. The carnal Christian doctrine produces men who are neither Christian nor moral, but who fail to see their blindness and nakedness. The state schools, with their emphasis on equality and integration, are totally humanistic in their plan of salvation. The more vigorously they apply their salvation dogma, the less willing they are to see its failure. A UCLA psychiatrist, Dr. Alfred Block, reported a growth in violence against teachers. His accounts of brutal violence against teachers was at once discounted by school officials who insisted that such incidents were minor and exaggerated. The teachers reported that Dr. Block scarcely knew a fraction of the problem. One teacher in a better junior high school reported that, on one usual day, students broke a hole in the wall to enter a classroom, started a fire, ripped up tile to clog a toilet, and by the hundreds smoked marijuana in the halls. Assaults on teachers are common. Attempts to inform the vice principal in charge of discipline are futile. She's a woman, hired because of her sex, and afraid of her job. When a teacher comes with a problem, now only serious things like assaults, she hides in her closet until the teacher leaves. Earlier, a vice principal who wanted to discipline was forbidden to do so. Why the inability to face up to these facts? The facts of humanism are such that these incidents are increasingly dismissed as irrelevant, as products of racism, bigotry, sexism, and the like. A faith either equips us to deal with problems or it disarms us. Kaufman's faith both blinds and disarms him, and the same is true of state school officers and officials. Second, it is the mark of the foolish man that he has a piecemeal religion. The fool hears the Lord's words. He may profess to believe them, and he may reject them as an unbeliever by an open profession. In either case, he doeth them not. He rejects God's statement of causality and consequence. Instead, he affirms that it is his will that determines consequences. He decrees that he will build without the Lord, beyond good and evil, and without guilt or justice, and his building shall stand. The rejection of God's causal order means an insistence that man's piecemeal order can stand because man so decrees it. Man takes bits and pieces of God's world at his own choosing, that is, integrity and honesty, as Kaufman does, and declares that his own autonomous will can give them meaning. The house built on sand is a structure built on an inconsequential plan, on a design whose permanence rests on man's will rather than God's universe of law and consequence. When subjected to stress, it collapses. Third, the fool's premise is that he himself is God, and therefore the determiner of consequence. A man lives without or in indifference to God because he believes in his own autonomy, self-sufficiency, and godhood. For him, the real world is the world of his imagination. The world of the imagination is a piecemeal world, and hence is devoid of true consequence. A Walter Mitty can, lacking all training, imagine himself an aviator, a ship's captain, or an industrial magnate. He can see himself as a great swordsman, lover, horseman, or anything else, without cost, because the world of dreams is not the real world. When men see themselves as autonomous, they live in a dream world. They are comparable to impotent men who in their dreams keep a harem larger than Solomon's, a quiver with delight and satisfaction. For such men, the world of the Bible is a very harsh world, because the Bible declares plainly that idolatry has consequences. The man whose world is the world of imagination isolates the act of bowing down and worshipping an idol from faith, morality, and world and life view which is basic to that simple act. He isolates events from causes and consequences because he admits the existence of no other world. Fourth, the man who hears the Lord's words and obeys them is the man who lives in terms of God's reality. Consequences are real to him because actions are not autonomous nor isolated. All thoughts, acts, and words occur in God's universe, and all have their consequences in terms of the world of God's law. Nothing exists in autonomy or isolation from God and His law world. Every moment, thought, and event is inextricably linked to God's total world and is inseparable from it. To be godly means, in part, recognizing that we are creatures of God, His creation, and for His purpose and glory, and in seeing our lives in their totality as a part of that purpose. Then, instead of piecemeal religion, we have a biblical faith.